Hello, and welcome to Earth Week with Global Minded. Global Minded creates a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented populations into the education, economic mobility, and leadership pipeline. Because our population is disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, and because this is the week of Earth Week and the 50th anniversary on Wednesday of Earth Day, we've gathered with our partners to really look through an equity lens at the kinds of things that we're affecting this week. So we're very proud of our sponsors, the World Academy of Art and Science, the Foundation for Climate Restoration, and the Alliance Center. And you will be hearing from these experts this week, including many of our emerging leaders who are 16 years and under. During the week, this week, we'll have a full lineup and you can register. We hope you can join us every day. If you can't join us each day, we will be featuring each of these segments on YouTube. Many of you are teachers. You might be getting continuing education credits. You can visit these sessions at any time as you need to. So we have a full program this week. We're delighted, Dr. Gary Jacobs, Dr. Mila Popovich, Dr. Erica Dodds from the Foundation for Climate Restoration, and Steve Schuth from the Alliance Center, and Brenna Simmons-Saint-Onge works with us as well. So we have a full program. We'll hope you join us every single day. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Diana Walker, and she's a senior advisor to the Foundation for Climate Restoration, and she'll be moderating today's panel. And I will see you again at the end of the session to wrap up with some other details. Thanks, Diana.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for having us all. It's a pleasure to be here. If you see me look over, my notes are on a different screen, so I hope this isn't too confusing for people. I'm not looking away. So first I want to say, I know we've probably all been on a lot of webinars. This is a really exciting week, and I hope we can capture your attention and not have you multitask, looking away at your emails, doing other things during the webinar. I hope we'll capture all of the attention, and we've got some good visuals and what I'm sure will be an interesting discussion. I also want to say, first and foremost, I know this is a challenging time for many, if not all of us. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. And, you know, it's a scary time. I know none of us know what's next. And so, you know, thank you all again for joining, and really want to recognize the moment we're in right now, which is challenging. But on a uplifting note, as probably everyone on this call knows, today is the start to Earth Week and the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. So we're thrilled to have with us Kathleen Rogers, who's the president of Earth Day Network, along with Rick Parnell, CEO for the Foundation for Climate Restoration, and Alexandria Villasenor, who's the founder of Uprising and an incredible and inspiring teen activist. So before we get started, we wanted to do a poll just to understand a little bit more about our audience, for everyone, not just our panelists, but the audience, to know who else is tuning in. I think we have that started. Great. So you can just click kind of what part of the world you're tuning in from. That would be great. Wonderful. All right. So it's mostly people from North America and some people from Europe. Great. Thank you all for joining. And I think we have one more now on age groups. Thought it's appropriate, since Earth Day is turning 50, you can find out how old everybody else is who's joining us. Perfect. So we have a lot of people on the call who are who've been with Earth Day the whole journey, which is really exciting, and young people as well. Excellent. All right, so we'll get started. I'm Diana Walker, the CEO of Walker Impact Strategies. As Carol mentioned, also Senior Advisor to the Foundation for Climate Restoration. As I mentioned on the call, we have Kathleen Rogers, CEO, President of Earth Day Network, Rick Parnell, CEO of the Foundation for Climate Restoration, and Alexandria Villasenor, who's the founder of Uprising. I know it's hard in webinars. I'm used to a panel discussion where that's somewhere in the background so you know who's talking at all times, but I think I've repeated enough now. So getting started, Kathleen, let's start with you since we're starting Earth Week. Can you tell us more about what is happening this week, how people get engaged, and the background of Earth Day, how it's become and continues to be what I would say is one of the most powerful and longest running movements of our time?
Yeah, and thank you for having me, of course, and glad to be with everyone on the panel, many people I know, and I hope some of the listeners. You know, the first Earth Day, which happened on April 22nd, 1970, was preceded by a couple of years of an awakening around the impact of 150 years of industrial development. It was abundantly clear what is going on in Delhi, for example, now, or other parts of the world in terms of air pollution was very much alive and well, unfortunately, in the United States. And a senator from Wisconsin, Gaylord Nelson, had been talking about the environment, sort of a lone voice crying in the wilderness in a lot of ways back in the 60s. And he finally decided to capitalize on the great foment that was going on in the United States around the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, and he declared a global teach-in on campuses that he hoped to inspire all the students to suddenly become concerned about the environment, although there was very little awareness. He hired a young guy named Dennis Hayes, and he was a dropout from Harvard Law School or the Kennedy School, and he then went on with Gaylord to create Earth Day. It was called the Teach-In, but Dennis and he changed the name. And it inspired people. The term had never been heard before. 20 million people, or 10% of the population, came out. And almost every one of our major environmental laws passed in quick succession with the bipartisan support of Congress and President Nixon, who was not really known for environmentalism before 1970, but really embraced it. It went global, and then from there, it became an annual event that 1 billion people participate in. But more than anything, it was based on science, the science of climate, the science of data that was coming in around pollution. And then we started to prepare for the 50th. We have about 1 billion people signed up to do Earth Day, and then tragically the virus took over the planet, and we are going digital. And so many of our activities were already digital, because when you're trying to reach everyone on Earth, you have to put everything online anyway. You have to put all the assets, the materials, and a lot of our programs were digital to begin with. So we're moving digitally. I don't think we'll have the full 1 billion, but people seem to be really committed to seeing this through. And we hope to have hundreds of millions of people doing Earth Day no matter what.
And tell us more about what that means. So what is doing Earth Day? What should people do this week?
2020 is a major year for environmentalism. As we all know, the climate commitments are coming due again. You're supposed to up your commitments. Sustainable development goals are due. There's 60 elections around the world in 2020. So we've long ago stopped calling it Earth Day, and we now call it Earth Year. For the United States, of course, we have a big election ourselves, but other countries do too. So one of our big programs, which is very effective in terms of focusing people's attention on voting, which is our Commit to Vote campaign underneath what we call Vote Earth, which is a global campaign. We also have a major citizen science campaign, which includes the US State Department, UNEP, multilaterals, governments, NGOs, faith groups. We're building the largest open source citizen science database in the world, which is done with an app on your phone, so you can participate literally from your deck, take pictures of the air, or if you're permitted out in the world, you can take pictures of plastic. It has an amazing AI process. Most of the big tech companies helped us put this together. And so our goal is to have 1 billion data points sometime after Earth Day that will allow all human beings to do one-stop shopping on air, water, plastics, biodiversity, et cetera. And we have dozens of other campaigns that can be run online, from downloadable histories of Earth Day, where you can add your own country's history onto this ever-expanding history of the environmental movement, which is really fun. We have art projects that are running globally, and we have downloadable materials for teachers who, as you know, are stuck teaching their kids, hundreds of millions of kids, online. And so those materials have been downloaded over and over again, and people are super excited to have an easy way to have an Earth Day in their online classrooms.
Excellent. So where do people go? How do they get the app and the name of the app? And then also, do they go to your website? What's the best way to direct people to get involved?
Yeah, we're calling our website sort of the homepage for the planet, because there are so many materials there that we've created and other people have. The app is called Earth Challenge 2020, and you can go to Android or Apple. You download the app. It's very simple. Instructions are pretty clear. And we have what you can do's, a civic engagement component that citizen scientists have embraced for the first time, connecting citizen science with an actual action. So if you're in Tanzania or Belarus, you'll get instructions in your language. And then when you're finished uploading the information, you'll get a pop-up that says, hey, want to take action? And you can do that as well. And that's on the App Store, Android Store, everywhere, as well as on our website, which is earthday.org.
Excellent. And you had shared with us a beautiful video that we might cue. Do you want to just give a little bit of background to this, and then we'll put it up? Is there anything you want to say about it, Kathleen, before we put it up?
Other than to say Gaylord and Dennis Hayes, the two people that really pushed Earth Day off the ground. If you look at Gaylord, the video's black and white. It looks so ancient in terms of video quality, et cetera, but the sentiments are amazing. And if you listen, you can't help but be emotionally engaged with what we have to do to clean up the planet. And that was in 1969.
Great. All right, let's cue that.
Our goal is not just an environment of clean air and water and scenic beauty, while forgetting about the worst environments in America. Our goal is an environment of decency, quality, and mutual respect for all human beings and all other living creatures. Our goal is a decent environment in its broadest and deepest sense. And it will require a long, sustained political, moral, ethical, and financial commitment far beyond any commitment ever made by any society in the history of man.
Very nice.
Beautiful,
Great.
Kathleen.
So, yeah, it's really inspirational.
That video is on our website if you want to listen to it again or use it. We'll put up a lot of videos that have great history and awesome photos that are free to take. And that video in particular, I think, is terrific.
Excellent. So for everybody tuning in, you saw the website, earthday.org. The app went in the chat room, and I think Carol will share all of this as well after this webinar. Kathleen, moving into climate restoration, to segue to Rick, I know Earth Day's been thinking about how they bring Restore the Climate into your all's work and maybe a theme for next year. Do you want to kind of just mention a little bit to that, and then we can segue to Rick and the Foundation for Climate Restoration?
Sure. I think for me, hearing from Rick and others that work with Rick, the concept of Earth restoration came really easily to me. I've worked on climate change many years, and at first it was hopeful, and then it became about mitigation. How do we mitigate it? And then another focus was adaptation. So we're going to mitigate it, but we're going to adapt to it. And both of those things, while practical, lacked the inspiration to drive the broader global public into action, because it was conceding from a science point of view that we had to do something to mitigate or adapt to it. Rick came along and talked about restoration, and I was immediately inspired. That was a couple of years. And for us, mitigation and adaptation are critical. The third leg of the stool, the one that we're going to focus on, is restoration. Not only because we believe that people and natural systems and tech, of course, critically important tech, which if properly vetted, and I'm all for vetting, it's one of the things I'm very focused on. I think the concept of restoring the planet is exactly what we need for the 21st century. We need to focus on it during this decade. And so after very little consideration by massive numbers of people, the world voted to make Restore Our Planet the theme for 2021. It's hopeful. It comes in the wake of, and of course this was never planned, of the virus, where, as we all know, there are many parallels between protecting the planet and the impacts of COVID-19, which I guess we can get back to later. But the theme already has been embraced by faith groups and governments, NGOs around the world, civil society, most of whom, because Earth Day Network's about everybody else, we are about everybody else. And so I think particularly among those communities, frontline communities, they really like the idea. So as we're developing it with Rick and other people, I think we'll find more and more people embracing it as the way we should go.
Perfect, great. So Rick, before I turn it over to you, we have one more poll to find out how many people on the call even know what climate restoration is. If we can pull that up.
Uh-oh, here we go. Wow.
All right, well, still some people who don't, so we will need you to start at the beginning, but you're talking to a familiar audience.
This is fantastic.
Rick, I'll turn it over to you to talk more about Foundation for Climate Restoration and the work you're doing.
Sure, thank you. Carol, you have quite a group here. That this is the highest numbers I've ever seen of people talking about climate restoration. This is incredible. And thank you, Kathleen, Diana, and Alexandria. And thank you, Kathleen, for taking on restoration. So it's going to say a little bit, I've been, like Kathleen, I've been in the climate space for quite a while. I spent almost 2 decades as part of the leadership team building the United Nations Foundation. I have to say, Kathleen, when I hear that video and the voice, I keep thinking about Ted Turner, and it's just truly inspires me, one of my my great mentors in my life. But so after a couple of decades, when I retired from the foundation, the UN Foundation, I wasn't sure how I wanted to engage on climate again. And I was at a conference, and our founder, Peter Fikowski, approached me, and he said, I want to talk to you about climate restoration. And you know, unlike the 78% here, I had a moment of, what do you mean restore the climate? We've been working on mitigation, adaptation. We've been 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees, all this back and forth for all of these years. What do you actually mean by restore the climate? And, you know, I started talking with Peter, and it was a very positive message. It was solution oriented. And so first, let me define what we actually mean by restoration. So this is the only bad news, and then I'll switch to all of the good news and opportunity that's in front of us. Can we do the video real quick? I'll try and voice over it. I think many of you have seen versions of the bathtub video, but this is our version. So if you think about the idea that for thousands of years, the Earth has been sitting in just about the right amount of carbon. And then comes along the Industrial Revolution, and for about 2 centuries now, we have been pumping all of this carbon into the atmosphere. You all know this. Mitigation adaptation works to how do we adapt to and how do we turn off the faucet. Critically important. But even when we turn off the faucet, if you look, you'll see that we are still going to be drowning in carbon. So for us, simply put, is that we want to find a way with our partners to pull the plug, drain the carbon, and get us back to a normal, sustainable, healthy level for the future of humanity. It's very, very basic. Now, in that, we have solutions around how to work with the oceans and some of the other things, but most importantly is about getting the carbon out of the atmosphere. So that's the number one goal. And for us, it's very aggressive. It's about getting back to 300 parts per million, which is where humanity has survived and thrived for thousands of years. So in order to do that, we need to have what we believe is a market approach towards reducing that 95% of carbon that will still be in the atmosphere in 2050, even when we reach net zero. And so we've worked with several partners to help connect the dots on carbon removal technologies. We work with investors, we work with entrepreneurs, we work with scientists, we work with universities in order to promote the idea that we can together remove this carbon. I think that you've seen a lot of reports that range between a multi-trillion to $10 trillion a year economic opportunity that's ahead of us. When I look at someone like Alexandria and I see the future ahead, this is a job creation opportunity. This is a solution oriented. This is a can-do. I think there's incredible opportunity. One of our great friends, Edgar Brockman, told me recently, he said, the greatest market, the biggest class of investment ahead for us is the idea of restoration and carbon removal technologies. Now, we are embedded in science. Our founder, Peter Fikowski, is a physicist. And as he says all the time, this has to be about the science. And so that's how we got back to the 300 parts per million. And we believe, as Kathleen said, we believe in rigorous testing. You have to vet these different technological solutions, but technology and natural solutions together, we believe, will be the perfect, as Kathleen is the one who coined it, thank you, Kathleen, third leg of the stool. We must mitigate, we must adapt, but we also must get to full restoration by the year 2050.
Great. And quickly before we turn to Alexandria, Rick, I think the foundation's got a pledge during Earth Week that you're asking all individuals to take, how you're engaging anyone around the world to work with this effort. Do you want to talk quickly about that?
Yes, so this is our, the picture you're seeing is a picture of our launch at the United Nations last September. We've just crossed the 6-month mark for the foundation itself, but we held the first annual Global Climate Restoration Forum at the United Nations and had a variety of speakers come and talk about the technological solutions, the natural solutions. We had Vatican ambassador there. We had all kinds of different representation across the different sectors talking about the opportunity and the commitment to climate restoration. But this is our website, F4CR.org. If you go there, what we're asking you to do is just take the pledge. Take the pledge that you will commit to restoring the climate. If you take the pledge, then we can come back to you and talk to you about what's going on in your local community. We have a campaign where we work with local governments that's a partnership with Earth Day Network in order to, one of the things that was announced at the forum at the UN is the local governments campaign. You don't have to wait for national governments. The local governments can take on climate restoration. And what that means is that they do their city, county planning, budgeting to do things like carbon negative concrete. If you're going to build a municipal building or a corporate headquarters or a high school or wherever it is that you are, why not ask for your leadership to do it in a climate restoration way? So if you will go to F4CR.org and simply take the pledge, that will allow us to be in contact with you about the different solutions that are coming online.
Excellent, thank you. All right, Alexandria, turning it to you, one of the most inspirational people I know. Tell us more about Earth Uprising and what you're working on, but also would love to have you tell the audience about your journey and the work you've done, including striking at the UN for many days and other activities that have brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, of course. First of all, thank you so much for having me on the call today. I hope that everybody is staying safe during this pandemic. And so just to start off with a little bit about the organizing that I've done, I have been deeply involved in the climate strike movement. So I got involved and became an activist on December 14th of 2018 to be exact, on the day where I started striking every single Friday in front
And
of
how
the
old were you
United
that day?
headquarters. I was 13 years old. I'll be turning 15 in 1 month. So that's exciting. And so I have been on strike every Friday for 71 weeks. Of course, recently though, those strikes have been inside with the digital climate strike campaign that's been going on during the coronavirus. I've also, since becoming a striker and an organizer, I got involved with the global climate strikes. So most recently, you may have known of the climate strike that occurred on September 20th of 2019, where millions of people all around the world protested throughout that entire week. About 6 million people all around the world went on strike, young people, adults. And so these global climate strikes you see that happen are these moments where young people come together all around the world and make their voice heard. And so we were planning to have another global climate strike on the week of Earth Week. Of course, we've changed our plans now, and we are going to have the largest digital strike we have ever had before. And so one thing that there's been a lot of conversation about lately in the youth movement is how to take action. So we've done a lot of reflection, and we're starting to think of what actually makes a demonstration a demonstration. Is it the people? Is it the message? Is it the numbers? Really talking about what makes a protest a protest. And so we're now looking at ways to do it over social media, how to do it online. So having a presence throughout social media, we're starting to have more social media campaigns during this time. And so one thing that my organization, Earth Uprising, will be doing is focusing a lot on climate education this year, but also during this time. Because after seeing so many young people go on strike and going on streets, I started to notice that there's a lot of young people who weren't going and getting involved because they didn't understand how they could, but also how they could make a difference. And so once young people were educated, but they're educated from their classmates' point of view or their friends, then it felt so much more relatable, but also much more of an idea that they could grasp. And so educating peer-to-peer, so young people feel more empowered to get involved and take action. So when we have a global climate strike or on Earth Day, we have so many more people involved. And so education is one of the top things that I've been focusing on, and I will be focusing on, education, action, and organizing.
Great. And I was going to ask a question about lessons learned along the way, but you've already started to answer that in terms of ways you're pivoting all the time by what you're seeing, which is really incredible. And you've started an environmental literacy initiative, if I'm correct about that, or you are starting that?
With the climate curriculum that we're working on for Earth Uprising.
And is that something people can learn more about that are viewing, or is it coming soon?
Yes, so Earth Uprising in the next year, later this year, will be announcing our school group campaigns. And so that's where young people can have either a school club or set up a school group where they can, it's more of the modern day green club. And with that, they can start educating each other. So to stay up to date with that, they can go to earthuprising.org, our website, where we'll be launching that later this year.
Great. So I want to get to audience questions as well. So I might just ask one more question pertinent to our time of COVID. I think it's something we all should discuss, and then we can turn it over to audience Q&A. So for each of you, Alexandria, maybe starting with you, around what's changed. Obviously, we've all gone virtual, but beyond that, what are some of the things that are keeping you up at night, or you're thinking about when you wake up in a day today that's a little bit different than before? I think you've been focusing on some inequities as well. Would love to hear some of your thoughts. Definitely.
So about the coronavirus, actually, my family ended up getting sick. My parents had it worse than I did, though. What was really scary and upsetting about this disease, though, is how it would come and go. So for 3 weeks, my dad would start to feel better for a few days and think he was getting over it. But then he would have a fever again. And my mom's lungs hurt and she had to have x-rays. So that was also a really scary aspect of the virus. It was super weird not being able to taste things, and even now some foods still taste weird, which is one of the first symptoms that people will say is the coronavirus. So we're starting to think about if we'll ever have an antibody test to be able to tell if we had it for sure, and also see if we're immune. And so in the United States, they're only testing people in the ICU, and we can tell more testing is needed if we're all going to be able to go outside again. So the way our government doesn't really have a plan for how we're going to end the shelter in place can't be compared to how we're not prepared for the effects of climate change either. And one example of that is, I think the coronavirus does hit a lot of other communities disproportionately as well, because there was an activist in who her hometown ended up being hit by one of the worst floods they've ever seen. And so it was hard to shelter in place and to stay safe when they're being hit by the effects of the climate crisis. And so there's all of these ways and aspects where you can't actually protect yourself from the new pandemics if you're having to protect yourself. And with melting of the polar ice caps and with climate change, we're going to see more diseases. And so climate change and the coronavirus do intersect with each other, and that has to be talked about.
And are you hearing your peers think about this as well? Is this something that's starting to percolate through young people's minds and talk about through social media or other ways?
Definitely. I think that my generation, we've seeing the coronavirus, it's definitely, I think, scarred us for life, to say the least. I think that there's a part of us that will always remember having to wash our hands or keep ourselves safe. I think that we're going to have a lot of after effects from the coronavirus. So even when the shelter in place is lifted, it may be a while before people feel comfortable to go out and protest again or go out and strike in these big groups because of what may happen to them. And so I think that there's going to be some effects of the coronavirus even after we're able to go outside again. So we're starting to have these conversations, how to make sure everybody's safe and how to make sure people are comfortable and still taking action.
Yeah, that's a big question in terms of how movements continue and how you mobilize during this time. Kathleen, I might have you take it from there in terms of what you're hearing from the billion plus people that you work with around the world, what keeps you up at night right now on this topic.
Well, I think there are a couple of things, and Alexandria was completely right. And I talked to her parents a couple of times when they were sick, and I was really scared for them just listening to them. It was frightening, but
and they are okay now, right? Sorry to interrupt on that, just to make sure.
Yeah, they're starting to feel better. It's taken a while, but they're getting better.
Good.
You know, we have very personal experiences with this. One of our staff members' wife died from the virus. Very sad. They have 4 boys, and incredibly sad. This was in Brazil because we're global. We have staff around the world, and that tragedy. We have so many people in India that work for us that are in villages or in remote places or in cities where they were separated from their family or couldn't get food and were frantic and so committed to Earth Day that all of their physical suffering was overridden by this passion that we found in our staff in South Asia, particularly, to get something done. And they worked tirelessly to do this. We also had a lot of staff on lockdown who had spent the last couple of years with us. These are young people building up their country's response to climate change. We have a great person in Nepal and Bangladesh, 2 different people, both of whom were suffering. And I think it was a shock to them because they're young, they're in their early 20s. It was a shock how depressed they became. And so I spent a lot of time, and other people did, counseling them on, you know, the infrastructure they put together is going to live beyond the virus, live beyond Earth Day. So we've had both tragedies inside our organization. They're incredibly personal, and I consider Alexandria and her family part of our family. So everyone was worried, and we continue to be worried. But in other places, they're literally hungry. And on top of everything, we have people for political reasons, Kashmir, that were cut off from the internet in India for a lot of awful reasons. And were unable to work, unable to get food, unable to get their paychecks. It was pretty frightening. I think the other side of this is the parallels. You want to tread softly on this issue, but the parallels between the pandemic and climate change are really important. And sort of on a 1, 2, 3, 4. The first is science. You know, yes, we didn't have science for months and months and years and decades the way we have about climate, but it's critically important for global leaders to believe in science, to watch and trust the data, and to believe in scientists themselves and not reject it. And it wasn't just the United States where this was going, although it was terribly, terribly wrong inside the United States. I think the second thing is be prepared, which is a critical part of what Alexandria is talking about, and everybody on this call, Rick, which is we can make a difference, we can change it, but we need to be prepared. We need to be engaged with tech companies and startups and entrepreneurs and encourage them to come up with solutions. I don't care if it's building materials or sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere. And while we have to be incredibly careful about some of these technologies and spend a lot of time, just like you do with a virus vaccine, you have to be rigid, data-driven, and focused. The intersection between being prepared and climate restoration is really clear to me. I think above all, leadership has been critically apparent on this virus and has been critically missing on climate change as well. And so you see the real leaders when they step forward, you see them, they have the guts to make hard decisions, keep people inside. They're going to need the guts to make hard decisions about how we solve the climate crisis and to see the connection between deforestation, biodiversity, trafficking, all the things that are painfully, we're all painfully aware of, but just can't seem to have the guts to do it and take those steps. And I think lastly, the human beings, if pressed upon by their leaders, will do the right thing. Yes, we see people driving around or hanging out together when they shouldn't be, but people have responded both for their own self-interest and for the people they love and for their community members. That's the same kind of thing that needs to drive climate change. We need to be prepared to make sacrifices to keep the planet safe. And I guess lastly, voting is a critical component. If we're going to have leaders that care about these things, we have to understand their motivation, what drives them to lead, what drives them to say what they say and behave the way they behave, and taking that on and having a real commitment among youth and everybody else to vote in and create and find our way to engage and elect leaders who will actually care about what we're facing. So I guess
and just on that note,
4 or 5 things. Yeah.
Kathleen, you know, that's not just the US election coming up. You all are tracking quite a few elections around the world.
60 other ones, right?
Yeah.
Losing some, by the way, but not doing too well in some important countries, but we'll see. It needs time to catch on.
Yeah, good. Well, that's actually, you've already started to answer a question that's come in from the audience that I'll turn over to Rick to add on, but Alexandria and Kathleen, please jump in as well. This is from Catherine at the European Climate Foundation. She asks, over the next 6 to 12 months, what are the big societal decisions as we emerge from COVID-19 that you think could help or hinder the goal of climate restoration?
A great question, Catherine. Thank you so much. So let me just say, as you think about the lessons we're seeing right now with the virus, to build on what Kathleen said, if you can imagine that as we continue down a path of global warming, we're going to see worse and worse flooding and sea level rise and people looking for food, all the things that, you know, on the societal breakdown that we're seeing right now. I never thought at my age that I would be tuning in to see, will grocery stores have food on the shelves in the United States, much less what's going on around the world. So I think this is a real wake-up call. I think it's a wake-up call for leadership, no question. I think people need to pay attention. Your vote matters. It really does count. I mean, the youth have been telling us that for the last couple of years, but you really need to get out. Whatever side of the aisle, if you're on the left, the right, or in the middle, wherever you are in the world, you need to be using your voice and voting. For us, if you think in terms of the institutions, I've had many conversations over the last 6-12 months with investors, entrepreneurs, scientists, people saying we need institutions like the IPCC process to say we need to really take on, for our purposes, we need to better understand climate restoration. We need to have more testing. We need to have more ability to vet. We need research. You know, we're working with Cambridge University as an example on what are some of the solutions to bring the oceans back to full life that could both provide jobs and food and sink carbon. And I think it's time for us to really make this a huge priority. That, to me, that has to be the lessons coming out of this.
Thanks, Rick. Kathleen, Alexandria, would you say any more on, you know, what are some of the big societal moves that need to happen? We've heard about voting. Alexandria, you've talked about how we mobilize in a time where we're not sure how much we can do that physically. What is it kind of over the next 6 to 12 months you really know we need to get done?
Alexandria, you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. I think that there's a lot we have to do in the next 6 to 12 months, and the elections are very big. That's, if you ask young people what's on their mind, the main thing that they're worried about or thinking about is the political system. So that is definitely really important. I think that one thing that's important is the biggest lesson we're learning is that during this time is that humanity can change quickly in the face of a crisis. I think we need to react as severely and quickly to climate change as we have to the coronavirus. I think that we've seen how quickly humanity can adapt and get out the word. And when the media can put out the message of climate change, we have noticed that our emissions have reduced globally as we've sheltered in place. So I think that humanity, if we try in the next 6 to 12 months, that we have the capacity to take climate action, to get enough action, because this is, the next 10 years does start the decade for action. And I hope that youth are out there pushing for that. And so I think that that is the main thing, is that we can do this if we try.
Can I pick up on that, Alexandria, and just say that for us, when we think about climate restoration, you know, a lot of us, we talk about people and planet, but at the end of the day, I think what the coronavirus is teaching us is that this is about humanity. It's about the very survival of humanity. It's not about the survival of the planet. As you point out, the planet would be more than happy for us to move on. Not to be, you know, too crude there, but this is about humanity's very survival and coming together. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd add to that, you know, the challenge for all of us is that, and I've been in this movement quite a while, and I've seen the start of youth movements that, for a lot of obvious reasons, kids need to graduate from high school, they need to go to college, they need to move on. Just looking back on Dennis Hayes, how he dropped out, did the first Earth Day, and then went back to college, went back to law school, who knows how many degrees. And so we have to figure out a way to help the youth groups and everybody else sustain their movement, because they can't do it without us. They're incredibly powerful group of people, but they need our help. And it has to become political, and youth need to vote. We have a continuing problem in the US, and I know a lot about voting. We do it for one of our main jobs is voter reg and get out the vote, not just here, but other countries. And in the US in particular, we have a dismal record, and it's been for multiple generations that you have 30% kind of max that eligible voters under 25 actually vote. That's so low. And so I think what Alexandria is doing and her other partners around the world, and in the US, other partners, are driving towards committing to turn out people in ways that we haven't seen before. And the proof will be in November. We say at Earth Day, we have 2 birthdays, April 22nd and November 3rd. And so we're hoping that we can celebrate leaders who really care about climate change. And so those two things are really important, sustaining it and having it become political. Lastly, I think Alexandria's interest and Earth Day Network's interest in climate and environmental literacy is completely in the right direction. That's been one of our major campaigns for almost 50 years, way before I existed in a real sense. And it's always been the sad stepchild of our movement. We have never funded it. We just did a World Bank study that showed that almost no countries have mandatory climate and environmental education or literacy. And so moving in that direction, we've suddenly found governments and multilaterals like UNFCCC interested in promoting climate and environmental literacy. And that's been multiple decades since the first Earth Day, and we still don't do it right. And so how can we expect people to become climate consumers or climate activists or climate voters or climate living as a climate person and having personal responsibility if we don't educate them? So I think where Alexandria is going, and Earth Day Network and really a handful of other groups moving towards climate and environmental literacy, and including with a critical climate restoration component that Rick's talking about, will maybe move the dial if we pair it up with continual action, voting, and consistency among all the groups that are activists on this, and bringing in, my favorite expression, everybody else. We can't keep talking to ourselves. And our role at Earth Day Network and in Alexandria's role, that's what we're doing, bringing more and more people who are not part of our community into this movement, and keeping that together and knitting it together and funneling those people into other organizations to keep it churning along is quite a challenge when you have 7.6+ billion people on Earth.
Yeah. Just speaking of the voting issue, I mean, conscious of the fact that Alexandria, unfortunately, I wish you could vote, but you can't yet. You're turning 15 in a month. You're getting there, but not quite. And I'm sure many of your peers you're working with are the same age as you. Is there anything just you've experienced as you're pushing get out the vote efforts, even though I'm sure it's frustrating yourself? You can't. How do you work with maybe the 18 to 25-year-old age group?
Well, it's funny. I'm the youngest of 5 in my family, so I'm always used to being the youngest person in the room, but still always trying to tell everyone, okay, this is what we got to do. So I'm used to being in a room with a lot of 18 to 25-year-olds. But one thing that in this upcoming election is I will technically be voting. Both of my parents have pledged to give me their vote in 2020. And this is another campaign that I'm seeing young people do all around the world, is have their parents or those in a climate organization pledge to give their vote to their young person. And so it's a way to let the future generation actually choose their future. I think that one thing is that a lot of young people, we sometimes don't really get a say in the political system, but we are now with being able to use this vote, but also with protesting. With the Fridays for Future movement, I saw so many young people feel like they were actually able to make their voice heard to their political system, even if they were younger than 18. So that's why I kept striking every Friday, is because it was a way for me to make my voice heard to my world leaders and policy and decision makers. And so action is one way to make your voice heard, and especially with the political system, but also if you're younger than 18, just talk to your parents, have them pledge to give you your vote.
Love that. Thank you. Okay, one last question. Kathleen, if you can do this in 1 minute or less. We're about to wrap up, but I wanted to get to one other question, which is, are there ongoing moves to obtain data capitalizing on the lockdown due to COVID-19, which would reflect if there has been any observable change on current climate data compared to pre-coronavirus era?
Oh, absolutely. It's people are doing all sorts of research and using satellite imaging and air pollution. In fact, kicking off Earth Challenge 2020 when the air is cleaner is sort of interesting because it's particulate focused. And that will change over time, obviously, as these apps learn to read the data and understand the data. But on the other hand, I think, as Rick says better than I do, that CO2, that bathtub, is not going to change no matter what happens for the next couple of months. It may have a tiny bit of an impact, and it may have an impact on human beings as well and what we get used to. I know in Delhi, they're amazed that the sky is blue. I talk to people all the time about in our staff, and it's blue, and they haven't been out of their cities because they're poor, and how amazed they are. But as Rick said, his data shows that that bathtub will not empty in any perceptible way, despite the coronavirus. Although having the animals in my neighborhood running freely and having air pollution levels down is certainly rewarding. We hope that is inspiring to people.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask
Go ahead.
So Alexandria, I just love the give the vote, and I don't have children, so I need to find someone to give my vote to and ask them to vote for climate restoration. Is there a place to go to learn more about this that you're recommending?
Yes, I think that there is Lily's Plastic Pickup in the Netherlands. She started to do this campaign a while ago, almost a year ago, around more of the having your parent give you your vote. And with her, it was her grandpa. And so definitely follow the youth activists because a lot of us are starting to talk about it. Earth Uprising will have a campaign about it when we get nearer to the elections. As well as if you're looking for a young person or an activist to give your vote to, I do have a list.
I love
Great.
it.
How can people get that? Will you put that out on social media channels, on your website?
I will put it on my Twitter. There's a lot of lists of young people and activists on Twitter, and I also have one that of other young people who have been protesting and been involved in the climate movement.
Tell them to join.
What's your Twitter handle?
Tell them to join Kathleen and me on restoring the climate.
I will.
What's your Twitter handle, Alexandria, so people listening can follow you?
Yes, on everything, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, it's Alexandria V 2005.
Great, perfect. Great, well, Carol, I'll turn it back over to you just to say some last kind of reminders on websites that were mentioned. You know, the Earth Day app that Kathleen mentioned is Earth Challenge 2020.
Right.
For people to download and get engaged this week. Of course, they can also go to earthday.org, where everything around this week is publicized on there. Foundation for Climate Restoration Pledge, you can take at F4, the number 4, F4CR.org. And Alexandria Villasenor, you've just got her Twitter handle, and her website is uprising.org. So thank you to Rick from the Foundation for Climate Restoration, to Alexandria from Earth Uprising, and to Kathleen from Earth Day Network. And Carol, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Diana, and thanks to all of you for making time for this really important topic today. One of the things that I know with the first generation to college group that we work with is that you really need to work with uncommon collaborators. And if you really want to move the levers of access and equity, you have to work with all different kinds of people that are not necessarily the people that have been in the lanes that you've worked with. And so I think it's just been really refreshing to see the ways in which you all are all doing that. So want to just share that we will have these sessions posted to the Global Minded Event 2020 YouTube website, and want to thank everyone again for joining us today, and also encourage you to sign up for our programs every day this week and get the young people in your lives if you've got kiddos at home, and make this really a teachable moment in any way that you can. And if you're visiting us from a corporation and you're interested in ways that your business can do a better job in the climate restoration movement, we would love to work with all of you. So this is the contact information for ways you can follow up. And then we will have a brief survey in the next day. And it's only got I think 4 questions, but we would like your feedback on how we can make these more effective over time. So thanks again so much for joining us, and to the Foundation for Climate Restoration, Diana and Rick and Alexandria and Kathleen. You guys are doing an amazing job, and we are really delighted to work with you all this week, as well as Mila and Gary from World Academy of Art and Science. So thanks again, and we'll look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Be well.
Nice job, guys. Thanks so much. Erica, good job.